The night sky over the Bosphorus burns like a furnace, and a single orange arc leaps from a Byzantine galley, slamming into the hull of an Arab dromon and exploding in a roar that shatters the silence of the water. In that instant, centuries of boarding tactics, of oarsmen swinging swords and spears, crumble like dry timber. What if I'm telling you that a single weapon can make an empire's entire doctrine obsolete in the flash of a flame? What do you think about that? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious about your take. The Byzantine Empire, at the height of its naval confidence, believed its triremes and their disciplined marines were unbeatable. Then, in the early 7th century, a secret mixture of petroleum, quicklime, and sulfur, later known as Greek fire, was forced through a bronze siphon and ignited on contact with water. The engineering was simple yet terrifying. A pressurized pump, a sealed nozzle, and a combustible compounds that could not be doused by sea. The result was a weapon that turned the sea itself into a furnace. Emperor Constantine V, recognizing the strategic shock, ordered the creation of a dedicated fireship corps, training engineers to maintain the volatile formula and sailors to maneuver the vessels under fire. This forced the Arab fleets to abandon their traditional boarding assaults and invest heavily in fire-resistant hulls and nighttime raids, reshaping Mediterranean naval warfare for the next 2 centuries. The new weakness? The Byzantines now depended on a handful of specialists who guarded the secret formula. When Constantinople fell in 1204, the knowledge vanished, leaving the empire without its greatest naval equalizer. Fast forward a few centuries, and the steppes of Central Asia are about to feel a different kind of shock. The Mongol hordes under Genghis Khan already commanded the world's most mobile cavalry, but their dominance rested on the shock of a charge, not on ranged firepower. Around 900, they began to equip their horsemen with the Composite Bow, a laminated marvel of wood, horn, and sinew, bound with animal glue and strung with silk. Its recurved design stored energy far beyond that of any plain wooden bow, delivering a bolt speeds that could pierce armor at 200 meters. The engineering brilliance lay in its modular construction. Each layer contributed elasticity, while the silk string resisted moisture, allowing the bow to function in the harshest climates. Traditional heavy cavalry, whether Persian or Chinese, could not close the distance fast enough to avoid a hail of arrows that shredded formations before they could engage. Genghis responded by reorganizing his tumans into units of mounted archers, establishing the Yam relay system to supply arrows and maintain bowstrings across the empire. This logistical revolution turned the Mongol army into a self-sustaining, rapid strike force that could outmaneuver any static defense. Yet the reliance on high-quality horn, sinew, and silk created a new vulnerability. When the Yuan dynasty extended into China, the supply chains for these exotic materials strained under the weight of a sprawling empire, contributing to the eventual collapse of Mongol rule in the east. Now picture the rolling hills of medieval France, where armored knights in shining mail dominate the battlefield, their lances thrusting like spears of iron. By the 12th century, the Crusades had introduced European warriors to the crossbow, a weapon that turned the tide for infantry. Its steel prod, windlass mechanism, and self-tightening trigger allowed a relatively untrained foot soldier to launch a bolt with enough kinetic energy to pierce a knight's helm at close range. The engineering breakthrough was the use of a steel prod, which could store far more energy than the wooden bows of the time, and a wooden stock that absorbed recoil, making rapid fire possible. The French King Philip II, witnessing the devastation at the Battle of Bouvines, mandated state-run workshops to mass-produce crossbows and instituted mandatory training for levies. This forced the feudal order to adapt. Knights could no longer rely solely on cavalry charges. They had to fight in mixed formations, develop shield walls, and invest in plate armor thick enough to resist bolt penetration. The surprise here is that the Fourth Lateran Council in 1221 actually condemned the use of the crossbow against fellow Christians. Yet the weapon's effectiveness ensured its continued proliferation. The new weakness that emerged was the rise of professional mercenary companies, trained in crossbow tactics, who began to challenge the traditional feudal levy system and shifted the balance of power toward centralized monarchies. These 3 revolutions, Greek fire, the composite bow, the crossbow, share a common thread. Each weapon appeared at a moment when an empire believed its military doctrine was unassailable. Each forced a rapid, systemic adaptation, and each left a fresh vulnerability that set the stage for the next great upheaval. If you're finding this valuable, smash that like button. It helps keep the story moving forward. The pattern continues, and the next weapon we'll explore will be one that turned the very notion of fortification on its head, forcing empires to rethink how they defended their cities and borders. Stay with me, because the next shift is as dramatic as the fire that lit the Bosphorus. If this is blowing your mind, hit subscribe and let's keep uncovering how a single invention can rewrite the rules of war. The first thunder of gunpowder cannons rolled across the Bosphorus in 1464, and the very stone that had protected Constantinople for 1,000 years shivered under the weight of iron. The Byzantine navy, once the unrivaled guardian of the eastern Mediterranean, had built its doctrine around massive wooden walls, boarding ladders, and the fearsome Greek fire that could turn a ship into a floating inferno. When the Ottoman engineers, under the direction of the master founder Orban, raised a massive bronze cannon, later called the basilica, its muzzle belched a blast that could hurl a stone the length of a football field. The engineering breakthrough lay not only in the sheer size of the barrel, but in the precise alloy of copper and tin that could withstand repeated explosions without cracking, and in the use of a corned powder charge that produced a more consistent and powerful thrust. The siege of Constantinople demonstrated in stark, smoky detail how a weapon designed for open sea combat could render the age-old strategy of high, thin walls obsolete. Emperor Mehmed the Conqueror, witnessing the walls crumble, ordered the construction of a new generation of fortifications across his empire, low, thick earthworks reinforced with angled bastions that could deflect cannon fire. This Tres Italienne design spread from Italy to the Low Countries, reshaping the very face of European cities. Yet the new fortifications introduced a fresh vulnerability. The static nature of the bastion system made it costly to repair after prolonged bombardment, and it forced armies to invest heavily in siege artillery logistics, a burden that would later strain the Spanish Habsburgs during their protracted wars in the 17th century. From stone to steel, the next shockwave erupted not on a city wall but on a battlefield of open plains, where the crack of a match ignited a new kind of fire. In the early 16th century, Portuguese traders returning from the Indian Ocean brought with them a simple yet terrifying device: the Matchlock Musket. Its design, a wooden stock that cradled a smooth-bore barrel, a serpentine lever that lowered a burning match into the flash pan, allowed a foot soldier to launch a projectile with enough kinetic energy to pierce a knight's breastplate at a distance of 50 paces. The Spanish conquistadors, already accustomed to cavalry charges, found their heavy horsemen decimated by volleys of musket fire during the battles of the Caribbean. The engineering advantage was the reliable ignition provided by the slow-burning match, which, unlike earlier handgun designs, could be fired repeatedly without the need for a separate powder charge each time. The shock to the Spanish cavalry doctrine was immediate. The traditional shock charge, which had relied on the momentum of armored horsemen to break enemy lines, could no longer guarantee victory against disciplined infantry equipped with matchlocks. King Philip II, after witnessing the loss of his elite tercios at the Battle of Lepanto, mandated the establishment of state-run armories that mass-produced standardized muskets and instituted a rigorous training regimen for infantrymen, turning the once-elite cavalry into a supporting arm rather than the centerpiece of the army. This shift forced the Spanish Empire to develop a new logistical network to supply powder and match across the Atlantic, a system that later strained under the weight of colonial rebellions in the Americas. The unexpected side effect was the rise of professional mercenary companies, such as the German Landsknechts, who mastered the art of volley fire and began to challenge the feudal levy system, paving the way for the modern standing army. The matchlock's crackling flame gave way to a cleaner, faster spark in the form of the flintlock. By the early 18th century, French gunsmiths had refined the ignition mechanism, replacing the volatile match with a piece of hardened steel that struck a flint, creating a shower of sparks that ignited the powder in the pan. This seemingly modest improvement had profound strategic consequences for the French Empire under Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon's doctrine of rapid, concentrated columns relied on the ability to close with the enemy before they could bring their fire to bear. Yet the flintlock musket, with its faster lock time and greater reliability in wet conditions, allowed his opponents to unleash disciplined volleys that could break his columns before they reached the enemy's heart. The engineering triumph of the flintlock lay in its self-contained ignition system, which eliminated the need for a constantly lit match, a hazard that had previously limited the effectiveness of infantry in rain-soaked campaigns across Central Europe. Faced with this new reality, Napoleon instituted sweeping reforms. He standardized the infantry rifle to a .75 caliber flintlock, introduced the Grande battery of artillery to soften enemy formations before the infantry advanced, and instituted the Campagne de Masse, a system of universal conscription that flooded his armies with trained riflemen capable of delivering rapid, coordinated fire. The French adaptation forced other European powers to adopt similar conscription models, reshaping the political relationship between the state and its citizens. However, the flintlock's smooth bore still limited range and accuracy, a shortcoming that would become starkly apparent during the Crimean War, where Russian troops equipped with rifled muskets inflicted heavy casualties on British and French forces at the Battle of Inkerman. The lesson was clear. The next leap in firepower would have to extend the reach of the bullet itself. When the Minié Ball entered the scene in the mid-19th century, it did so with a quiet elegance that would reverberate across continents. The French artillery officer Henri Minié devised a conical bullet with a hollow base that expanded upon firing, allowing it engage the rifling grooves of the barrel without the need for a tight fit. This innovation transformed the smoothbore musket into a weapon capable of delivering accurate fire at 300 yards, double the effective range of its predecessor. The American Civil War became the crucible in which the rifled musket's impact was fully realized. Union and Confederate soldiers, armed with the Springfield Model 1/8 and the Enfield Pattern 3/4, found that traditional line infantry tactics, massed formations advancing in unison, were now suicidal. The engineering advantage of the Minié Ball's expanding base meant that a single volley could shred a formation before it could close the distance. General Robert E. Lee, after the devastating losses at Gettysburg, ordered the construction of extensive earthworks and trench systems, a defensive posture that would dominate the later stages of the war. The Union Army, under the direction of General Ulysses S. Grant, responded by developing coordinated artillery barrages and employing cavalry to disrupt Confederate supply lines, a shift that emphasized maneuver and logistics over sheer manpower. The widespread adoption of rifled muskets forced militaries worldwide to rethink battlefield geometry, leading to the emergence of entrenched positions that would later define World War I. Yet the increased range and accuracy also exposed a new weakness. The muzzleloading process remained slow, limiting the rate of fire in prolonged engagements. This bottleneck set the stage for the next revolution, a weapon that could be loaded from the breech, dramatically increasing the speed at which soldiers could deliver fire. The breech-loading rifle arrived on the Prussian stage in the form of the Dreyse needle gun, a weapon that would alter the balance of power in Europe. Invented by Johann Nikolaus von Dreyse in the early 19th century, the needle gun employed a bolt-action mechanism that allowed a soldier to insert a paper cartridge from the rear of the barrel, fire, and then extract the spent case without the need to stand upright and ram a ball down the muzzle. The engineering brilliance of the needle gun lay in its needle-like firing pin, which pierced the paper cartridge to ignite the primer, a design that, while prone to fouling, offered a rate of fire nearly double that of contemporary muzzleloaders. At the Battle of Königgrätz in 1867, Prussian infantry equipped with Dreyse rifles unleashed a rapid succession of shots that overwhelmed the slower Austrian forces, whose troops still relied on muzzle-loading rifles. The Prussian victory forced the Austrian Empire to overhaul its infantry training, adopt breech-loading weapons, and restructure its command hierarchy to integrate faster, more flexible firepower. Otto von Bismarck, recognizing the strategic advantage conferred by the needle gun, accelerated the modernization of the German rail network to ensure rapid troop movements, linking technological innovation with logistical efficiency. However, the needle gun's reliance on black powder and its susceptibility to corrosion in damp conditions revealed a fresh weakness: the need for a cleaner, more stable propellant. This realization spurred the development of percussion caps and, eventually, the adoption of smokeless powder, a transformation that would empower the next generation of firearms. The Maxim Gun, a hulking apparatus of iron and water-cooled barrels, entered the theater of war in the late 19th century and redefined the very concept of infantry firepower. Sir Hiram Maxim's invention harnessed the recoil energy of each shot to automatically cycle the next round, delivering a continuous stream of bullets at a rate of up to 600 rounds per minute. The engineering marvel of the Maxim lay in its toggle lock mechanism, which used the backward thrust of the barrel to eject the spent cartridge, cock the firing pin, and load a fresh round from a belt of ammunition. Its first decisive use came at the Battle of Omdurman in 1893, where British forces, equipped with a handful of Maxim guns, decimated a vastly larger Sudanese army armed primarily with spears and rifles. The psychological shock of a machine gun's relentless hail forced the British Empire to rethink colonial warfare, shifting from large, open-order infantry assaults to a doctrine that emphasized fortified positions, entrenched firepower, and the use of indirect artillery to soften enemy formations before a limited infantry advance. The British War Office, recognizing the transformative potential of the Maxim, instituted a program to mass-produce the weapon and train specialized crews, creating a new class of soldiers, machine gun operators, who became integral to the defensive strategies of the First World War. Yet the Maxim's massive weight and reliance on water cooling made it cumbersome in mobile operations, prompting engineers to develop lighter, air-cooled variants such as the Lewis gun. This evolution highlighted a new weakness: the need for rapid, portable firepower that could keep pace with mechanized units, a challenge that would be answered by the advent of the assault rifle. The Sturmgewehr 44, often hailed as the world's first true assault rifle, emerged from the crucible of World War II's Eastern Front, where German soldiers faced the brutal reality of close-quarters combat in urban ruins and dense forests. Developed by Hugo Schmeisser and his team at the Henel factory, the STG-44 combined a select-fire mechanism with an intermediate cartridge, the 7.92 mm Kurz, that offered a balance between the range of a rifle and the controllability of a submachine gun. The engineering breakthrough lay in the rifle's gas-operated, tilting bolt system, which allowed reliable cycling of the shorter, less powerful cartridge while keeping recoil low enough for accurate automatic fire. In the Battle of Kursk, German infantry equipped with the STG-44 could lay down suppressive fire while advancing, a capability that forced the Soviet Red Army to adapt its tactics, emphasizing deeper artillery barrages and the development of their own automatic weapons, such as the PPSH-41. Adolf Hitler, impressed by the weapon's versatility, ordered the mass production of the STG-44, leading to a reorganization of infantry squads into fire team structures that integrated a rifleman, a machine gunner, and a grenadier, a template that would become the foundation of modern infantry doctrine. However, the reliance on the intermediate cartridge created a logistical strain. The German war economy, already stretched thin, struggled to produce sufficient ammunition, a weakness that contributed to the eventual collapse of the Wehrmacht's offensive capabilities on the Western Front. The lesson was clear: a weapon's tactical brilliance could be undermined by the industrial capacity required to sustain it, a paradox that would echo in the post-war arms race. The final shockwave in our journey arrives not from a barrel of steel but from a rocket that tore through the night sky over the German countryside in 1942. The V-2, the world's first long-range ballistic missile, was the brainchild of Wernher von Braun and his team at the Peenemünde Army Research Center. Its engineering marvel lay in a liquid fuel propulsion system that combined ethanol and liquid oxygen, a guidance system that used gyroscopes to maintain a stable trajectory, and a warhead capable of delivering a 1-ton explosive payload to a target over 300 miles away. The V-2's ability to strike without the need for an aircraft carrier or a runway forced the Allied powers to confront a strategic dilemma. Traditional air defenses could not intercept a projectile that traveled faster than sound and burned up in the upper atmosphere. In response, the United Kingdom accelerated the development of radar-guided anti-missile concepts and, more importantly, invested heavily in the post-war missile programs that would give rise to the Cold War's nuclear deterrent. The United States, recognizing the strategic value of rocket technology, recruited many of von Braun's engineers under Operation Paperclip, channeling their expertise into the development of the Redstone and later the Saturn rockets that would eventually launch humans to the moon. The V-2's legacy, therefore, is not merely a weapon of terror but a catalyst that reshaped global power structures, birthing an era where the threat of long-range missiles dictated diplomatic negotiations, defense budgets, and the very definition of national security. Yet the V-2 also exposed a new vulnerability: the reliance on complex, high-precision manufacturing and a supply chain that could be disrupted by strategic bombing, a weakness that would later be exploited during the Allied strategic bombing campaign against German industrial centers, hastening the end of the war. Each of these weapons, from the incendiary streams that lit the Bosphorus to the rockets that pierced the stratosphere, shares a common thread. They arrived at moments when empires believed their military doctrines were unassailable, only to watch those doctrines crumble under the weight of a single transformative invention. The pattern is unmistakable. When a new weapon appears, it does not simply add firepower. It forces a complete reevaluation of how wars are fought, how societies organize their economies, and how leaders conceive of power itself. The next question, then, is not which empire will fall, but which civilization will be the first to recognize that the rules of war have changed before its rivals do. If you've been following this far, you already know that the story of warfare is a story of adaptation, not of domination. The next time you hear the crack of a rifle or the roar of a missile, remember that behind every flash lies a cascade of reforms, a reshaping of societies, and a reminder that no doctrine is ever final. The greatest advantage in history has never been the possession of the most powerful weapon, but the ability to see the battlefield anew the moment a new weapon appears. Empires rise and fall not because they lack courage, but because they fail to see that a single invention can expose a weakness they never imagined. Keep that thought in mind as you look at the world today, because the next weapon that forces a paradigm shift may already be hidden in a laboratory, waiting to rewrite the rules of war once more.